Thank you. So guys, thanks for joining us. Anyone who jumps in, Jewel, I'm sure will handle and let them in. But thanks for joining us for Monthly Mindset. This is something that we do each and every month with Heather, and we're so lucky to have her. It is not real estate related, not sales related. It's just good stuff. You know, sometimes I think that we need to focus on ourselves. And we need to be okay so that we can pour into the people that we impact, our clients, our family, and so forth. So, what better opportunity than to have someone like Heather pour into us and meet with us on a monthly basis? So, Heather, you are a licensed therapist for those who don't know, and you have brought a guest with us to join us today, in Ashley.
Hi.
Hi, Ashley. So, yeah, Heather, it's all yours. It's you and Ashley. Take it away.
Listen, I'm ready for it. Thank you for that lovely and always kind introduction. You guys know that I love joining you on the second Friday of every month just to kind of talk about things that are potentially interesting for you when it comes to mental health. Sometimes we even talk a little bit about kind of world stuff. So you just never really know what you're going to get. Although Tyler has been taking my secrecy away from me because now he sends you guys little tidbits of what we're going to talk about. So I'm totally excited and thrilled that Ashley's here with us today. Ashley is a friend of mine who lived in Hawaii. She's temporarily off island. And we can't wait for her to come back, but she assists ChangeWorks with several different things, and I won't bore you with the details, but she is a licensed clinical social worker. And I feel like she and I, no pun intended, have similar mindsets when it comes to how we impact and involve ourselves with our environments. So Ash, you want to give us like the 30-second Ashley introduction? You don't have to, you can beg out. You can plead the fifth if you want.
Sure. So I've been a licensed clinical social worker for about 10 years. I was in this field, and then most recently I was working at the inpatient psychiatric unit at Capsule in Kailua. I'm now doing some outpatient therapy work, and yeah, that's pretty much me.
And she's a wonderful human. For those of you that missed that part, she's a fantastic human. But today we are going to talk a little bit about resilience. And I have to credit Ashley with the idea because, oh man, I can't even see my slideshow. Hang on. I have to credit Ashley with the idea because I was sort of thinking about, we had talked a little bit about anxiety, a little bit about depression, and I felt like we had been maybe erring on the more difficult side of topics. So I wanted to talk a little bit about something that maybe would bring us a little bit more hope. And when I was kind of brainstorming with Ash a few weeks ago, she said, you know, a lot of my clients and a lot of the people around me have been talking about resilience, but I'm not really sure we know what resilience is, or like what we do to build it, or even if it exists naturally in us. And so I thought, well, what better opportunity than Monthly Mindset to talk about resilience in sort of a big picture perspective. We are not going to be able to do a comprehensive overview of what resilience is today. But if you guys enjoy it and you think it's a good foundation, I'm happy to take feedback and we can build on other mindsets to talk about this kind of ongoing. And as you guys know, a lot of the mindsets build into each other and inform each other. So I thought it might be kind of a cool foundation building topic to talk about, especially because, you know, for the last couple of years, we've been talking about COVID and how it has impacted our environment, our workplaces, our relationships, even the way that we connect with other people, how we very abruptly had to switch from meeting for lunch or Pauhana to meeting on Zoom, and trying to maintain those connections in a way that was very authentic. And so I feel like our community was starting to sort of move out of that. We had come off of this big surge, and now people were starting to, you know, get back into doing in-person things. And then other things in the world have sort of sidelined us. There's a war going on, there's inflation. So there's lots of things that are heavy and that weigh on us. And, you know, if we're not careful, can really become permanent weights that, you know, send our posture into a spiral and create, you know, darkness for us. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about how resilience shows up in our life, how we can build it, and then maybe some practical tools and steps we can take to start putting this into practice. Again, as always, I'm super grateful that you all are here and you help me with my ongoing resilience. So I appreciate all of you. So the first thing we're going to do is define resilience. And, it's funny, if you type it into Google, like 75 different things come up when it comes to resilience. But, the Webster's definition is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, and this idea that toughness is a synonym. And what I want to be really careful about, ongoing in this particular conversation is we want to make sure that toughness doesn't mean I don't care, or toughness doesn't mean I can't have emotional bandwidth, or toughness doesn't mean I need to build a brick wall around myself and not involve myself with other people in order to protect myself from things. And the reason I put the second one in there is because I think it informs that, right? Resilience is the ability of a substance or an object, like a human, to spring back into shape, and elasticity is the synonym used. So what we want to think about as we sort of ponder this idea of what resilience looks like in our day-to-day is, it's not the capacity to get over things. It's not the capacity to go around things, but rather it's creating the capacity to understand difficult things that we're going through, steel ourselves, STEEL, against things that can potentially damage us, and maybe some elasticity like a rubber band to move ourselves around those difficulties. And so try to conceptualize this idea of mental toughness as armor, as opposed to mental toughness as like a brick wall that we hide behind. Any thoughts on that?
I have like a really good real life scenario about resilience that's like totally relatable. My biological mother passed away this summer, around June. We didn't have, like, she didn't raise me, so we didn't have like a mother-daughter relationship, but regardless of that, she was my mom. And during that time, I was actually like getting into studying for my real estate license. And I've lost a lot of people in my life. Like my life story is pretty nuts, but I've gained a lot of skills over time to be able to like really sit in my emotions and heal myself, so that I can spring back into life. Because if you don't, then you can go down really dark paths and get really absorbed into the things that are going on around you. And so instead I've gained a lot of skills to be able to like use my pain as fuel to drive myself forward more. And I that's like exactly what I did, is I enrolled in the CE classes, and I used that traumatic experience to push myself into a better position in life, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I think is meant by these two definitions, and why I think I mixed and merged them together, because the idea isn't that we ignore things or we wait until they pass. It's this idea of sitting with something until the other side becomes clear, whatever the other side may be. It might be, I don't know, it might be a new job, it might be a new relationship, it might be a different figure in your life that creates a similar relationship as to the person that passed. I was thinking a lot about the bereavement work that I did a long time ago, what now feels like a long time ago. And I remember that people used to say, I need to figure out, I want things to go back to normal. I need to figure out how to get things back to normal. And one of the most powerful things I learned during that time is there's no such thing as going back to normal. You have to create and recreate a new normal. And it looks like a totally different chapter. It looks like new people, maybe sometimes. It looks like leaning into yourself sometimes. And so I love that you shared the idea of resilience around loss, as opposed to the idea of resilience around, trying to go backwards. We're always trying to move forwards and to redefine and recreate what normal might look like. Excuse my house guests if you guys can see them. I don't know what they're doing. But, so what's the point? What's the point of doing any sort of learning around resilience? Well, I took a couple of sort of long and lengthy definitions and tried to bold out the things that I thought would be the most impactful for you. So when we talk about building resilience, we talk about giving people the strength needed to process and overcome hardship. Resilience is a reaction that we have and a skill that we develop around things that are difficult. So when we lack resilience, we tend to get easily overwhelmed. We tend to turn towards what we would consider unhealthy coping mechanisms, things like excessive drinking, things like risky behavior. And people who lean into resilience and are building that over time tend to tap into their strengths, tend to utilize their support systems, and then they tend to make those very determined, actionable steps to be able to work through, overcome, and ultimately come out to the other side of whatever the challenge is. And so what I liked about that first definition is how it led into the second definition of being able to adapt and bounce back when something difficult happens. And so I think, as I've shared with you guys in the past, I think it's unrealistic for us to expect that we're always going to be in a positive mindset. We're always going to be happy. We're always going to feel some sort of emotion that's positive, because sometimes things suck. Sometimes things are hard. Sometimes difficulty lasts longer than we would like it to. And so when we talk about this idea of building the skill of resilience, we want to make sure that we're creating this protective measure that helps to steel us, again, STEEL, steel us against the impact of what's happening so that we can work through it, as opposed to, knock it down, beat it down, overcome, do something besides overcome it. And so the other interesting thing that sort of came out of what's the point of building resilience is the idea that resilience and the act and skill of it can help us offset things that can lead to an increased risk of things like anxiety, things like depression, things like, previous trauma, coming back up and reliving that previous trauma. So when we build resilience, we are creating strength that helps us move through things. And my favorite little quote, this came from an article that I actually found on Psychology Today. I liked the idea of having a mental reservoir, right? So you think about your bank accounts. You have a checking account that you use for your bills, and you have a savings account for a rainy day, or buying a house, or making a big purchase. And I thought about this idea of having a mental reservoir of things like action steps, things like tasks that you enjoy doing, things like hobbies that have zero productivity, zero ability to make money, zero ability to do anything besides be enjoyable. And so I thought about resilience as this reservoir in the back of my head of just times I felt strong, things I've done where I've been really successful that I can pull from when I'm having those days that are more difficult. And so we sort of call on that savings account of strength so that we can navigate through things that are difficult without completely falling apart. Mind you, again, completely falling apart is totally okay. We are allowed to do it now and again. The one thing that we're not allowed to do when we fall apart is unpack our suitcase and live there. One of my favorite examples of what it looks like to sit. When you sit in your stuff, you bring your suitcase, you unpack it, you use it, and then you pack it back up and you take it home with you. When you commit to and you live somewhere for a long time, you unpack your suitcase and then you stay there. So what we don't want to do when we fall apart is unpack our suitcase, put everything away, and live there forever. So what does it look like to build these skills? What do these skills even look like? Well, it's actually, semi-simple in nature. What we want to do is not overcomplicate these things more than necessary, because we don't want to make your life harder than it already is. You guys have faced so many challenges in your workplace, with your personal lives, with each other, even with just like the drama that it takes to go to the grocery store sometimes. So when we build skills, we want to make them as simple and as navigational I just made that word up, is as possible. So the number one thing that we can do when we are starting to build that mental reservoir of resilience is hold a positive view of ourselves and the abilities that we carry. This can be as simple as stopping your work, grabbing your notebook or your Post-it or your notepad, whichever of the 17 things you happen to have sitting on your desk at that time, and jotting down a couple of things that you are good at or a couple of things that you like about yourself. It sounds silly and sometimes it even sounds juvenile, but this is how we train our brain to flip when we're starting to go down negative paths or negative spirals. Another way to build that mental reservoir and sort of start to pack away some things to prove ourselves successful and have things to pull from when we need them is create the capacity to make realistic plans and stick to them. I don't remember which mindset it was, but I remember talking about when we build a fitness routine, the goal we want to stray away from setting is I'm going to go to the gym for an hour, 7 days a week, and I'm going to lift the heaviest weights in the gym every day. What we can do instead of that is I'm going to go 3 times this week for 45 minutes, and I'm going to do a realistic workout plan that I found on the internet, and I'm going to download and see how it goes. Make a realistic plan, something that you can be successful at, and then do that. Literally just put it into place. I have shared with you guys in the past that I'm currently a gym junkie. We don't know how long that's going to last, but I do go to the gym in the morning. I did not want to go this morning. I thought of every single excuse I could possibly come up with to not do it. My gym partner wasn't here. It was like kind of a tight time frame this morning. I thought of like all these excuses I could do. And then I just said, okay, you're going. And I got up and I put my clothes on and I went. And I wouldn't say it was like the most amazing workout I've ever had. I wouldn't say that I didn't skip a couple of sets because I didn't feel like doing them, but I did go through my routine and I definitely felt better afterwards. So realistic plan, make a decision, stick to it. Over the course of a couple of weeks, you will end up feeling much more successful and then that reservoir will grow. A third skill that you can build, and this one actually I would argue takes a lot longer than sort of making a decision to set a goal and stick to it, is what's called having an internal locus of control. So if you think about the locus of control as sort of like your stomach makes decisions for a lot of other parts of your body. So when food comes into it, it fuels things. When food doesn't come into it, it holds on to things. And what we run into in terms of hardship can determine what happens with our other organs. And so your locus of control is similar to that, right? It's this belief of how much control you have over your big picture life, like the rest of your life, how much control you have over your day to day, how much control you have over the other people in your life, things like that. So in order to build a locus of control, we have to start to believe that we have control over something. And so this can be as simple as piggybacking it off of step 2, making a goal, realistic plan, sticking to it, and then reminding yourself like, hey, I made this goal, I stuck to it, I'm going to give myself a little pat on the back. The fourth one is being a good communicator. I think when we talked about the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace, we talked about how communication is the foundation of any relationship that you have with your peers, but also with your boss. And part of being an effective communicator is understanding where the other person is in your conversation. But being a good communicatee, which I don't know is a real word, although spell check did not catch it. So maybe it is a real word. Understanding how to listen and take in information is just as important as learning how to convey information. So when you effectively communicate with each other, it starts to build that confidence that you need because your conversations and your relationships are experiencing successes. And so it starts to pour water into that reservoir so you have success times to pull from. I think when we get to this 5th one, viewing themselves as fighters rather than victims, I think we need to be really careful with how we build this as a skill. I have a one-on-one client that I work with, who has a really, really difficult time understanding that she can be the victim of something without being the victim. And there's a very, very nuancy sort of gray area that you have to grab onto in between that. You can be the victim of poor treatment without being a victim. And so when we view ourselves as fighters, rather than I'm going to destroy everything around me and I'm not going to become emotionally vulnerable or connect with anyone around me, I want you to think about this as I'm going to use effective communication skills. I'm going to stand up for myself. I'm going to have good boundaries. I'm going to make realistic plans and stick to them. And I'm going to view myself in a positive light. Those are your ammunition, as opposed to I'm going to win this argument, or I'm going to be the best, or I'm going to always succeed. And so I think we can absolutely 1,000% view ourselves as a fighter equipped with all that ammunition, as opposed to a fighter that needs to win. And then the last section is having high emotional intelligence and managing our emotions effectively. I think we could probably do a series on emotional intelligence. And I know at KW, you guys talk a lot about how to use emotional intelligence in your relationships and your work. And so essentially the idea of having emotional intelligence and building it is learning how to understand how you feel, use how you feel, and then manage how you feel to be effective in your relationships. So rather than, I hate you, you're the worst thing that ever happened to me, you would say something like, I feel frustrated by this behavior and I'm having a hard time connecting with you because of it. So when we have a positive view of ourselves, we make realistic plans and goals and stick to them. We lean into believing how much and how little control we have over our life. We communicate effectively with others. We have good, solid ammunition and techniques. And we wrap that up with being emotionally intelligent and being able to understand our own emotions. We create this mental reservoir of resilience that helps us feel strong and capable when the difficult times come. That was a lot. Any thoughts? Ash, you want to add anything?
Not at the moment. I think that's pretty.
It's a lot, right?
Yeah, it is a lot, but they're each unique in their own how they serve us.
Yeah, and the thing too that we talk a lot about in KW is actually not trying to do everything at once, like picking something and then making that the thing. You don't have to fill your reservoir today. It's not a 32-ounce mug. It's a very large and vast mechanism of having tools that we pull from at various times in our lives. So as we talk about the skills that we're building, and as we talk about sort of the idea that we're going to be impacted and affected by trauma, we want to think also about resilience as part of our recovery process. I don't know if I shared this in our last mindset, but my grandmother died in December. She was the matriarch of our family, and it was my last grandparent to pass away. And she was this really incredible woman that I guess in some ways I thought was going to kind of live forever. And her death shook our whole family. It, highlighted some unhealthy relationships and sort of brought those to light. It, required us to talk to people that maybe we haven't talked to in a while. And it created some opportunities for connection that maybe those of us in difficult relationships within my family had been avoiding. And so I think about how I build my resilience and how my reservoir sometimes runs dry because I'm overworked, or because I'm not leaning into self-care, or because I'm not doing those things on the last sheet. And I think about how resilience helps us in our recovery process from something like grief. And so resilience isn't just things that we build. Sometimes it's things that we're born with. Resilience can come from not just our DNA and our genetics. We can, sort of pass down resilience to our kids and through our families. But when we have traumatic experiences early in life and we do the things to repair and heal from those, that can build our resilience early on in childhood and then sometimes just stay with us. Those, we can't modify, we can't change those experiences. However, in the studies of resilience over time and how we've talked about bringing our best selves into our community and our environment, we can learn some of those more specific skills that can serve us in our day to day. So this is things like the first step from the last slide, breaking out of negative thought cycles. The more we think, oh gosh, I'm such a failure. Oh gosh, I suck at this. Oh, I'm never gonna insert problem here. The more that we lean into that and we live there, the more that we're unpacking our suitcase, right? But when we take the 10 to 15 seconds that we need to snap our fingers or to flip our script in our brain, we can say things like, wow, I'm really struggling with relating to my boss. I like got to come up with some tricks and tips for how to relate to my boss or understand them better. I really struggle with road rage when I drive, and I need to start with some calming techniques before I get in my car and drive somewhere. I can't seem to save any money. All I do is spend my money. That's the negative thought. Then we flip that into, you know what, here's an opportunity for me to set up an automatic savings plan to start to build my wealth. So when we lean into those positive traits about ourselves, it can be flipping our thoughts from negative to positive. It also includes things like avoiding, this is the worst day ever, or this is the worst relationship ever, or this is the worst situation ever. It's the fancy clinical term is catastrophizing. Like sometimes it gets thrown around a little bit more than I would like, but catastrophizing is all about thinking that everything is just the worst or everything is going to fall apart. So when we push back against that and we think to ourselves, okay, right now this feels really difficult. Right now I'm really struggling with the loss of my grandma, and I haven't been able to grieve much because I've been super busy. This is not the worst thing that's ever happened, but I am really sad about it. And I am really struggling with how to deal with the emotions that I'm feeling. So I'm going to do something healing for myself this weekend. And when we flip to those upsides, when we're faced with some of those setbacks, we can not only experience some of the healing, but we're again continuing to build that mental reservoir of tips and tricks and skills that we pull from when we have the harder times. And of course, this totally leans into actively living according to our own core principles. This does beg that you need to identify what some of those core principles are prior to actively living in them. However, those really basic, positive, skill building things that we do, like getting, 8 hours of sleep. I know it's kind of impossible for some folks, but getting 8 hours of sleep, for me, sometimes it's 9. Eating things that fuel our body in a way that helps it be productive, and body movement, actively doing those things that help us to recover from the things that are harder. One really easy way to make this parallel is when you are actively in the middle of a bunch of different projects and all of these healthy habits are a struggle for you, think about resilience as the end of those projects and how you lean into the process of recovering from them. So rather than, oh my God, I'm so glad that project's over, I'm going to jump into the next one, take a breath and think to yourself, all right, I worked really hard during these last couple of weeks. I know I need some free time. I'm going to do 1 or 2 things this weekend, or next week I'm going to take a mental health day, any of those sort of options that you have to actively reduce the stress that you were feeling over those last couple of weeks, and then set yourself up for success on the other side. So we talked a little bit about this in like kind of specific techniques, but if you can think about breaking, pushing, and looking, I know maybe not the easiest thing to remember, but BPL is, floats off the tongue a little bit. But if you can lean into recreating those negative thoughts into positive thoughts, even as simple as I'm not a failure. I'm just struggling with finishing this paperwork. It will help you reframe things into a much more realistic light in your day to day, as opposed to leaning into all of that gray and all of that negative. When you push back against excelling things into the worst thing ever, you create opportunities for you to make small deposits into that reservoir that you can pull from in the future. And then when you are faced with some sort of challenge, look for the opportunity that you can use, even if it's something as simple as the paycheck on the other side of this is going to be really helpful, or I'm going to take myself out for fancy dinner when I'm done, or I'm going to buy a really delicious coffee that I wouldn't normally buy. Just look for those small opportunities to be able to pull from that reservoir so that you can lean into creating and building that resilience for yourself. Any questions or thoughts before we talk about the 5 pillars? Awesome, we got shaking heads. Perfect. So when I did a little bit of deeper research, first of all, there's like 10 or 12 different ways to look at resilience. One of them was like the 7 types of resilience. We have the 5 pillars. The 5 pillars are named 5 different things in 5 different scenarios. This is just the one that seemed to me the simplest information to share with you. The one thing I struggled with is in one of the 5 pillars, there was growth mindset as one of the pillars. And I know that's like such a huge KW philosophy, is living in the idea of growth and success. And so I left it out, but it's kind of like the asterisk number 6 pillar. And I think I don't know, you might be able to sort of say purpose / growth mindset. So you guys can go with that. But number 1 is self-awareness. You need to have a clear perception of who you are as a human, what you stand for, what's meaningful to you, how even perhaps like other people perceive you and how that informs your perception of yourself. And understanding that and becoming self-aware and learning how you operate will help you lean into a state of mindfulness, which is active, open attention on the present moment that we're in. For example, right now I can hear one of my dogs snoring, which makes me think about taking a nap. I just heard the guys leave to go surfing, and now I'm really grateful that the house is quiet because I don't have any distraction behind me. My feet are like firmly planted on the ground, and the ground and my butt is firmly planted in the chair. And I feel like I'm actively here with you guys without any distraction. And I think that really is because this week I've really been focused on creating opportunities for tiny little tidbits of self-care, because my self-awareness dictated that I needed to take some smaller moments to be able to create energy, create confidence, and create vitality in myself so that I could actually be present with you here today. It helped that one of my giant projects that's been sitting on my brain for the last 6 weeks ended on Monday, and we're very grateful for that, because now we can take a very large deep breath and open up some hours in our day. But that is because this week, the positive relationships in my life, the people who support me, the people who care about me said, how can I help you? What can I do to provide you with support? And then not only did those relationships fuel me by asking what they could do for me, they followed through on that. And they created opportunities for me to trust them to continue to do that. And so that helps me live with a sense of purpose, a recognition that even in the times that I struggle, and even in the times that the weeks are harder, I'm living with the ultimate purpose to create impactful change in our community, whether that's 1 person, 5 people, 1,000 people, 25,000 people. I know that these pillars are what creates the foundation for me to be able to show up and be super present with all of you, with my clients, with my one-on-one folks. So I think if I was going to create this, most of the images online, I did look for one for you guys to sort of take with you. I don't know, they kind of looked like one of the buildings in Washington, DC, and that didn't really feel right for the presentation. So if you want to screenshot this, or I can send the PowerPoint to Tyler and he can disperse that to you. These are sort of the building blocks, I would call them, of how we make sure that we are actively pursuing the filling of that reservoir. Without these things or some of these things that are happening on a pretty regular basis, it's going to be really difficult for you to actually fill that reservoir so that when things get tough, you can pull from that. So I don't know if you guys have heard of the concept of Ikigai. I was going to talk about it in more detail, but as I realized there's no way we would have had enough time to give it what it needs. But the idea behind Ikigai, and maybe we'll talk about it in the future, is that all of the things that we do are interconnected. And this was kind of the best image I could find. You are the very core of this diagram. The fancy clinical term for it is self-actualization. But when you combine the purposeful actions in your day-to-day, the awareness of yourself and how you interact with yourself and your environment, the care of yourself so that you can bring your best self to the situations that you're in, how you lean into the relationships that support and love you, and then how you ground yourself in your day-to-day, when those things all come together, they create what's called self-actualization. And that is the feeling of you being your absolute best version of yourself in the moment that you're in, so that you can then interact with your community with that best self. And the hope from that would be that your resilience is something that helps both yourself and other people when times are tougher, through your relationships with yourself and through your relationships with others. So the cool thing about what this diagram also represents is you can have a lot of success when one or two things intertwine. You can also have a lot of success when all of them intertwine. And so because they interconnect and they impact each other, when you are grounded in the present and you're exercising mindfulness and you're also super self-aware, that can help fuel your purpose. When you're very purposeful and you're very grounded in your present day to day, it can help you be really connected in your relationships. So even if you think you're failing at one or two of these things, or one or two of these things are really difficult for you, just know, in my heart of hearts, I believe that these all build off of each other and can continue to build off of each other as they grow and change and evolve with time. So you don't have to do all of them today. You don't have to be successful at all of them today. What we wanted to do in today's hour was make sure that I'm planting the seeds for you to remember that these are the things that you start to do, that you set a goal for, and that you create a habit around, so that you can overall experience this idea of handling difficult situations when they come to you, feeling confident in your difficult conversations with each other, with your spouses, partners, families, with your friends. And on the other side of it, feel some sense of relief when you're able to tackle those more difficult things because you've had the skills to pull from. So that is that. And I now realize that I talked about the other topics being heavy, and this one felt a little bit heavy too. So maybe it was heavier than I thought it was. But anyway, what questions or thoughts do you have? Ash, you want to add?
Sure. So I know you said you were trying to come up with an image for it. So I've been talking about resilience with a few of my clients, trying to help them create a mental image of what it looks like. So I work with one woman that she has a young child, and I often refer to resilience as a muscle. It's a muscle that we build. The more you work at it, it gets stronger. The more we don't work at it, it gets weaker. So when I was working with her, we created this image of kind of her observing what it looks like for her child to learn to walk, and as a kind of analogy for resilience. So each time he learns how to place his feet, he learns how to engage his muscles, he learns that he can reach for help, then he's finally able to stand, and then he's able to walk. And the more that he practices that, each time that he falls, the quicker he can get back up, the less support that he needs to hold onto the couch. And that was kind of our analogy for her, is that she's learning to build her muscles. She's learning to ground her feet. She's learning to activate her thighs. And, those are all the pieces of self-care and mindfulness and, everything that Heather's been talking about. And the more that she practices using those, when things happen, like when her child's older sibling knocks her child down, the faster that she can get back up. And so resilience, kind of the way that I see it is that the more that we practice these positive coping skills, the more that we build our own reservoir when things happen, because they always happen, it's how quickly can we recover? How and knowing that each time we recover, we build that muscle more. And we don't have to go as far back down the path as we did the last time because we learned lessons, we strengthened our muscles, and we get back up quicker. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I just like creating that image in my mind.
I think it's a really good analogy because when I can picture the KW office and I can picture people walking around and I can sort of envision somebody saying, "You okay?" And somebody goes, "Yep, just learning to walk, no problem." And they just move about with their day. So I can certainly see that happening. And I like the idea of the muscle as an image too. I'm bummed that it didn't pop up anywhere in my research because it makes so much sense, right? If you picture a bicep, before a bicep has ever done a bicep curl, there's no muscle to really be seen except for kind of what existed at birth. But as you do curls and you increase the weight, the muscle grows, and sometimes there's little tears in it, and then those tears heal. So that's a really good way of thinking.
And then
about
that
it.
same weight is easier to lift. Like the more
Right.
that you practice it, that weight is easier to lift, which is, it's kind of fascinating, actually.
Totally science, I tell you. It's brilliant. Any other thoughts, questions?
This is kind of interesting. When I'm hearing you guys go through that, I had a different perception of it. So mine might be completely inaccurate or kind of wrong, but I kind of felt like it's like, you're spinning plates and it's like a constant thing. And we're in our own little, I don't know, we're all doing our own little thing, and what we might have some successes in one area and some failures in others, or we might be succeeding all around, but it's like you don't really arrive. Like you can kind of grow these skill sets, but it's a kind of an always evolving thing. And it takes perhaps something internal or even external to throw that off. Cause you might be like, for me, I'm kind of balancing a lot of things all at one time. And I'm like, hey, today's a fantastic day, and then one thing unexpected that came from left field completely throws that off, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not okay anymore. Like, and then but I'm realizing like it's so interesting how everything was going so perfectly and then now it's not, and then I'm kind of refocused, and I really do go through a lot of those things, which is the self-awareness thing. Sometimes I feel like I'm almost overly self-aware, but I'm always like, that's in like the forefront of my mind. How am I treating other people? How am I showing up? If I say this, what's the intended result? What's going to happen? What's the ripple effect that will happen with this and with that? So that's what I mean by over self-aware. It's not, I don't think you can have that, but it's like I'm almost over analyzing that process. So it is interesting though. I feel like you kind of never arrive. You just strive for that perfection.
It's funny that you say that too, because that's what we talked about a lot in bereavement, right? Like you can identify what a new normal looks like after you've lost that relationship, but you'll likely never feel like you've arrived at some like ultimate golden gate of healing, right? Like you will get to the point where it doesn't feel the way that it does today, but it will be a different version of the person that you are. It's the plates reminds me of a circus, right? When you're juggling lots of things, and if the elephant doesn't follow the protocols of what he's supposed to be doing and something goes sideways, there's lots of scrambling to figure out what we're going to do next, right? But the idea of that reservoir to me is that backup plan or that person that you go to. It's funny, I used to go to the hospital, see Ash, and meet with patients on a regular basis, but every time I went, Ashley and I would spend 5 to 10 minutes talking with each other. And sometimes it was like, I need to vent and I need to complain to you and I need you to not fix it. I just need you to hear me and let me like deposit this here. And it became this really beneficial friendship in which we were able to maybe help each other spin those plates a little bit less. At least that's how I felt. Ashley have a different view of that. But I think it's a good analogy that you bring up too. What other thoughts do folks have?
I picture when you actually like, you know, when you aim for that perfection, which is not attainable, it's like some yoga pose where you're kind of just glowing and floating about 10 feet off the ground. You're like, oh, I want that. But then that's not, you don't really arrive there.
Yeah. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to do some of those things. And that's okay.
Sometimes too, I feel there's, areas where you have some control. It might be limited, but you can control how you deal with it. And then sometimes there's larger, I don't mean to say larger by volume or scale, but there's other issues, like what's happening in our world that are, far away, but they will have an impact or may potentially have an impact on how you think you're putting, you've put plans in place to climb your steps or whatever, or just survive or however, that sometimes that you recoil because like big things are happening in the universe or, in the world. And you're like, sometimes I feel like the shit I'm doing is like completely unimportant in comparison to what like these other people are dealing with, and that sometimes is rather taxing, so perhaps, finding ways to get around or to like navigate those type of emotions and feelings, I think, would be helpful too.
Yeah. And 1,000%. So I showed up to do a training the other day for a group of drivers who transport folks to and from the hospital. And I sat down and I was like, how's everybody's morale today? Like, do we need to start with a joke? Do we need to, have a little vent session? And two of the guys go, you know what? I would just rather be in Ukraine. I would rather be there feeding people or helping or supporting or something. He's like, it's not that I don't think what you're going to talk about is important, but I would rather be there. And it really, Alan, you bring up a good point, right? It totally puts things into perspective. The things that we do are important. Okay. Like the things you guys do are important. The things Ash is doing and Carolina's is important. What I'm doing is important, but there are opportunities for us to go, okay, wow, like maybe this is not the end of all. Like there are definitely things that are happening in the world that are much more kind of systemically impactful. Where you don't want to get stuck is living in the malaise of that, right? Because there is a lot of that we cannot control. And so my clients that have popped into session this week that have said like, wow, the world is just really heavy, acknowledge that. It is really heavy. But at some point, we do have to recognize that we don't have a whole lot of control, at least not in a micro way, of what's happening in the world. So I think recognizing it is fine and talking about it is fine. And even being upset about it and angry about it is fine. But we just want to live there.
Mahalo, yep.
Awesome. Well, are there any other thoughts? Last week we went like 5 minutes over. So I feel like this is my payback for taking your extra time. I bet everybody was late to meetings last month.
No one?
Bueller?
Does anyone even I mean, I feel old
So,
now.
yeah.
Like that's a thing that I even.
Alan knows.
I don't.
Don't
Who's
you, Alan?
Bueller?
Come on.
Who's Ferris
I
Bueller? I don't know.
chuckled,
Who that is.
yes.
What do you mean who's for? Okay, first of all,
No, I was
Ferris
trying
Bueller is
to. I was trying to
iconic.
pretend that I was like in my. I'm only 22. What are you talking? Who's Ferris Bueller?
My word, this 22 stuff. And before you do your close, Chad, I just want to thank Ash for the idea, for planting the seed, for showing up today, and for sharing her wisdom. I hope she comes every month because she is a beacon of light in my life, and I appreciate her. So
Thank you. And thank you guys for letting me be here.
Absolutely. Thanks for pouring in, Ashley and Heather. We appreciate you both very much, and we can't wait to for us to learn in advance from Tyler via email what the next topic is going to be, but we greatly appreciate it. This is like I said, this will be recorded. We'll put this on our Facebook channel, as well as our Google Drive and all that kind of stuff. So you guys can, if ever you need to, dive right into some of the past recordings. That's what it's there for. So we greatly appreciate everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your day. And we will see you next month. And have a wonderful weekend.
So,
Make it a
bye
great one, everyone.
guys.
Bye, guys. Take care.